Okay, time for part deuce of the Ukraine unraveling. Last time we talked about, perhaps a bit too long, but you know me, I'm long-winded. We talked about the last 10 to 20 years of Ukrainian history that was leading up to the friction. Really, there's been friction for the last decade, but the friction that hit a boiling point here in the last couple weeks / couple months. Resulting in the dismissal of the democratically elected President Viktor Yanukovych. Okay, let's get to the actual events now of just the last few months. Woo! Because it got nasty. And it has been the top news story, at least for the last 2 weeks, across all press outlets everywhere on planet Earth. Everyone's been watching this one closely. So what happened? All right, we just talked about in the last podcast that this is a society that's been under some strain since its inception. Friction between what group should we partner up with? Should we partner up with to many of us here in Team West, it's obvious, of course. We want to partner up with the Europeans. They're richer countries. They got more going on. They have this thing called the European Union. The prospects are really good. Pretty much when countries join the European Union, their standards of living go up, their economic indicators go up. So yes, you want to go with Team West. And the United States would have been encouraging that as well. I would say covertly, but we were actually doing it quite overtly. The U.S. didn't have a big hand in this game from start to finish, but it would have been, our propensity would have been for the Ukrainians to join Team West. And there were many within Ukraine, on the western side, who said, yes, we see our future as Europeans. Then you had the folks on the eastern side of Ukraine who said, hey, a lot of us are ethnically Russian, a lot of us speak Russian as a first language, we have historic or family ties back to Russia, and here's the deal. The Europeans are broke right now. Their economies are going downhill. Mother Russia is strong. A lot of the folks who are more pro-Russian within Ukraine would also point to the obvious fact that they share a border with Russia, that Russia does have one of the biggest militaries on planet Earth, certainly one of the biggest nuclear arsenals. And so this is not a country that you want to piss off. On top of that, Russia supplies Ukraine with most of its energy needs, like almost all of them. So they're very reliant on Russia. Another reason to not piss them off. And Russia has in times past used these things, threats of military, I won't say intervention, but strong armedness, threats of raising gas and oil prices, of which they have, physically turning off oil pipelines. Oops, how'd that happen? Suddenly Ukraine has no oil. So Russia has had a vested interest here and played a bit of a role as well as pressuring them. And again, so you have people within Ukraine. I never like to simplify things like most press and pundits do, which is, oh, it's Russia versus the United States here. This is the last of the Cold War battles. Well, yes, ideologically that is going on. But I actually think that Ukrainians are the ones who are doing this, and Ukrainians are figuring out what they want to do with their country, and they have differences of opinion. So honestly, I don't give nearly as much credit to outside forces as a lot of these political pundits want to. They're like, oh, it's all the Russians. And it's like, no, there are people within Ukraine who have leanings towards Russia for obvious economic and geopolitical and military reasons. I don't think anybody does things simply because Russia told them to or because the EU told them to. This has been a real battle for the heart and soul of what should our country do? Because the Russians and the Europeans have never gotten along that well, and they kind of do now, but they're not in any big economic union. And of course, Russia and the United States hate each other, and we still do, even though the Cold War ended 20 years ago. That's another podcast altogether. But let's get back again to, okay, how does that play into events? As I've now outlined, Viktor Yanukovych, who not so honestly won the 2004 presidential election and then was booted out, and then legitimately won the 2010 election, has been president. He is openly pro-Russian. I think he did speak. I think he had to learn Ukrainian before he even started running for political office decades ago. I think he actually was totally kind of ethnically and linguistically Russian. but a Ukrainian. And so he has outright, gosh, I remember when he got elected back in 2010 saying, I'm going to make a point here. And he stood up and said, Ukraine is not going to join NATO. Ukraine will consider joining the EU, but my political party, don't really think it's in our strategic or economic interest. This is a side note that I haven't even put in yet. There were folks across the Western world who were asking and inviting Ukraine to join NATO, a military alliance. Of course, you can figure out what Russia thought about that. So that's why the Ukraine is kind of a lightning rod for activity between Russia and the West. Anyway, Yanukovych said, no, we're not joining NATO. Forget that. That's not going to happen. I am working with the Russians. They were working on more and deeper economic ties with Russia, again, because they almost have to, because they get so much energy supplies from there. But he was really doing it in terms of ignoring any sort of strategic advancement economically with Team West. Let's just call them the European Union. All the while, in the background of this, again, for a decade, there was this sentiment, this idea amongst Ukrainians, some of them, that they were going to join the EU, that they were going to go more pro-Western because it made more sense, because 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, the EU was rich, Russia was poor. Well, times change, and now both teams have a bit more to offer to Ukraine, more equal. So there were those that said, yeah, okay, Yanukovych is in charge, fairly elected, I will let it ride. But what happened is that Yanukovych, not unlike his predecessors, became terribly corrupt, perhaps more than his predecessors. They're saying now that maybe $10 to $12 billion may have been milked out of the Ukrainian government resources and went straight into his family's pockets and or his cronies' pockets. So you do have a high degree of cronyism and nepotism and corruption within societies like this, and Ukraine has been doing badly on all three fronts. And again, not to completely blame the pro-Russian faction and Yanukovych specifically. His predecessors were wildly corrupt too. But he apparently has been taking it way further. He also not only dissed the West as soon as he got into office, he immediately jailed this lady, I'm going to tell you her name again, Yulia Tymoshenko, a former prime minister and opposition leader, the lady who ran against him in the 2010 election, then ends up in jail a year later. So she was jailed under the charges of corruption. I know, it just starts to go in circles. So Yanukovych jailed her, opposition leader, and the lady who ran against him for president, because she was still rebel-rousing. And so what you have is corruption on top of Yanukovych and his group starting to pull more power to himself and the office. So they changed the 2004 Constitution. They adopted a new one wherein the president had the power to basically stack the deck. That they changed their constitution to say that the president of Ukraine can pick entirely his own cabinet and pick a whole host of other positions in the government, and that started to bother people. Then he jailed Tymoshenko, an opposition leader, and that just looks bad. I mean, even if the lady was guilty of something, it just starts to look bad that now you're attacking opposition people. You've already won your election, but you can't let it go. And then people have said that the press has been curtailed and that they started to use their political power against the press and against opposition. And now you're starting to get into levels of not just economic corruption, but political corruption. And on top of that, you're more and more, he was dissing the West in favor of a partnership with Russia. Okay, that now sets the stage entirely, and I can wrap this up now in a few minutes. Okay, so what happened a few months ago? Gosh, it seems like forever ago now, but I believe it was in October/November, if memory serves. I want to say November. That the European Union was getting very serious about, okay, well, we're working, they've been working on this entire time. I'm not even suggesting that Yanukovych and his crew threw the European Union representatives out. They didn't. They, this whole time, were supposedly working on a deal not for EU membership. Let me make that clear too. Ukraine was not just going to magically be put into the EU, but it was a partnership with the EU that would put them on a path to membership. And that path was not going to be easy, by the way. The Europeans were saying, look, your economy's a mess. I mean, you just suck. Let's just call a spade here. Your corruption is rampant. You guys, your debt is out of control. Your numbers suck across the board. So if you're going to take on an economic partner, and this is in real life, real business as well as governments to governments, you're going to want your partner to clean up their act if you're going to make them a partner. So the European Union was saying, here's the deal. We want to get you in. We want to start lessening trade barriers, start to increase trade with you, and put you on a path to membership, but you're going to have to clean up your act. And here are the rules. So the EU starts to write down stuff. You're going to have to do all of these things in order to join the club eventually. And it's going to be painful. It's called restructuring and refinancing and balancing a budget. It's stuff that no one likes to do. So Yanukovych and his crew looked at that and said, yeah, we don't really want to do that. In fact, we really don't want to do that at all. And so when it came down to the wire, and this is in November, this is just a few months ago, when it came down to the EU saying, okay, well, we're finishing up the agreement, we're making photocopies of it for everyone to sign, that's when the current debacle started. Because that's when Yanukovych and crew said, oh no, we're not doing that. I mean, if we start to play by the European Union rules, it's going to cause economic pain at home right now, because we're going to have to balance a budget and do all the stuff they want us to do, which is going to hurt. And we're all wildly corrupt here, which means that our corruption and all the books that we've been fixing so that we can pad our pockets, that'll end too. And so Yanukovych and crew said, nah, we're not doing that. No way. I don't think so. And they turned it down. That's what started all this, friends. And again, now we're getting into current events that probably most of you know. People at that point back in November started to say, what the what? We've been working on this deal for 5 or 6 or 10 years. And now this guy who's openly pro-Russian is totally slamming the door on any possibility of Ukraine joining the EU forever. And he's lassoing us to Russia, which, by the way, Russia ain't doing that well right this second. Russia has a lot of muscle to flex and a lot of money to lend them, but other than that, they're not that good of a long-term investment. Sorry, my Russian friends. They just don't have that much investment. The Russian population is declining. They're not a booming economy. They're not producing tons of stuff, and they're not buying tons of stuff. So why the hell would you partner with them? That's what the pro-Western groups within Ukraine would have been saying, and still are saying. So when Yanukovych and crew basically said, nah, we're going to pass on the EU thing, even though we've been pretending like we're going to do it for 5 years, that's what lit the fuse and got people all hot and bothered. And now I can summarize that they've been hot and bothered, and protests have been increasing on and off ever since November. It seemed, it got really hot right when they did this. For those of you that follow this, you could have gotten live imagery of tires burning and people throwing rocks back in November and December. But it seemed like it had largely cooled down late December to January. It seemed to have cooled down. That I don't even know what concessions were made, or if many Ukrainian protesters just gave up and said, oh, we're just so screwed. I mean, quite frankly, I'd have been of that opinion, been like, oh my God, we just can't win. But it seemed like things had cooled down, that maybe they had smoothed over the public dissent. And one of the ways he did it, which I must allude to because it's hilariously overt, is that Yanukovych said, hey, look, Ukrainian people, we're broke. The Europeans want us to do all this stuff which we can't afford. And look, I can fix this because Mother Russia, that is Vladimir Putin himself personally, met with Yanukovych and said, okay, well, you know what? You don't need that European deal. They're going to ask you to change your economy to become stronger for the future. We don't want you to do that. How about this? How about Russia lends you $15 billion right this second? $15 billion here. Here's the check. And we'll lower gas and oil prices for you. How about them cookies? To his, I won't even say to his credit, on his behalf, I'll defend Yanukovych for 1 millisecond. Who wouldn't take that deal? What political leader would not take that deal? What political leader, even in America, would say, no, I think we're going to choose the hard path that's going to cause pain and suffering for Ukrainian people, and therefore assure that I will not be elected again. But it's for the better long-term good of the country. No politician ever would do that anywhere, ever. I mean, yeah, there are some here and there, but boy, they're pretty few and far between. So taking $15 billion in cash from Russia to pay off debt and getting a better oil and gas deal? Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of obvious, and that's what Yanukovych did. But again, that's when things started to cool down in December, January. But for reasons which, again, I'm not even going to pretend to understand, protesters never fully left, and they didn't leave the Maidan. The Maidan, which is kind of the central square. It's kind of like the government square where the parliament buildings and stuff are. So there had been a low-key protest there since November, and then it just started getting hot again. And it got so hot in the last couple weeks that the government, that is Yanukovych, had to send in more and more police and more riot police. And then when you have groups of people who are angry and pissed off and riot police who are trying to clear them out, you have friction, you have rocks thrown, you have bullet shot, and that's what started to happen increasingly. I want to say it was a week or two ago where 4 people got shot, and that, talk about classic mistakes. It's classic dictatorship mistake. You start shooting at people, and there's only one of 2 ways to go. One, you shoot at everyone and kill them all, so there's no one left to dissent. Or 2, you kill some of them, which infuriates everybody else, and more people come and start protesting. Option 2 is obviously what happened in Ukraine. Once they started killing people, and you know, sometimes I feel bad for the police because they're out there getting hit with bricks and Molotov cocktails, and shit's getting out of hand, and stuff happens. But it always ends badly for the government/police when they start shooting people that don't have guns. So they shot some people, protests swelled, and the final nail in the coffin, literally, was that 48 hours ago, or actually 72 hours ago, late last week, they sent in snipers, which had to have been military trained. They are also sending in gangs, basically, that weren't government sanctioned, but basically governments of this type will go hire thugs. Literally, go to local prisons or local bars in Skid Row and hire people just to go cause trouble and beat up protesters. So you had hired thugs that were there present, but really the worst part was you had these military-trained snipers who came in late last week. And that's when 20 or 30 people or 50 or 60 people or 70 or 80 people got shot because all hell broke loose. Protesters throwing Molotov cocktails and rocks, shots start being fired, and snipers. So why do I keep bringing up the snipers? Because snipers are trained killers. I'm not trying to offend snipers if anybody's got a bead on me right now. But there's only one reason to bring in snipers, and that is to kill people. Police and riot police and even army to a certain extent can be there to control people. Snipers are killers. They're there to kill people. That's it. They don't have a secondary occupation. They kill people. And so when it was recorded on social media, which of course is what happens in today's world, that you had professional snipers out there taking out school teachers and student protesters, that was it. And that was the point at which, late last week, that even his supporters started, the rats started bailing out of the sinking ship. And so at that point is when people started to say, hey, this guy's bad. He's corrupt, we all know it. He's pro-Russian, we all know it. And actually, he still had a lot of supporters in the East. But now he's turning the army and the military perhaps to go kill Ukrainians. Unarmed people, nope, that's no longer a leader. That's a dictator. He was democratically elected, but he has abused power to the maximum. And the maximum way you can abuse power is kill people. And that's what he's doing to maintain his position. And that was it. And politicians, even within his political party, started to abandon him. That's when the street riots started to swell incredibly, and people were like, this is it. Well, people started occupying government buildings, and police were letting them. Police were like, oh, no, this is over. I mean, you reach that critical mass when everybody knows the party's over. And it's like, okay, we can do one. Again, the police can do one of two things. Start killing everybody, which they didn't want to do, or just be like, nope, go on in. So people started occupying government buildings in Kiev. And by the way, these were protests that were happening all over Western Ukraine and some in the East. And I should also add, there were pro-Yanukovych protests in the East who were protesting against the violence in the West, because again, this is kind of a divided society. So that was what was going on. The whole country starting to be in flames. Certainly the capital. Police letting people go through. Politicians who started to say, no, wait a minute now. No, we're not supporting him anymore either. We're going to join the opposition. You even had police officers who started to come from different districts to support the protesters. So that's the kind of chaotic mix that last week ended in. You also then had the leaders of Germany, well, I should say diplomats from Germany and Poland. I don't think the U.S. was there. And Russia, who came in to broker a deal at the end of the week just to say, okay, look, you guys got to stop. Your country's getting borderline civil war. So we, your neighbors, don't want to see that. And so they pressured Yanukovych and his crew to cut a deal. And the deal was that they would call early elections, that they would call elections in December at the end of this year, that they would make some concessions, that they would return to the 2004 Constitution. Thereby, the president would have to divest himself or give back all of his powers he had been accumulating to himself for 4 years. He agreed to that. He agreed to the early election. He's like, okay, all right, but it was too late. Things had already spiraled out of control. They even went out and announced it to everybody. The opposition leaders within Ukraine helped broker that deal with those foreign diplomats, and they're the ones that agreed to it. And this is the opposition parties, several opposition parties, not just one or two. And they all got together and said, here's the deal. And they went out and talked to the people and said, hey, here's the deal. We got a deal. Everybody can stop being violent. And it was too late. People were like, nope, we want him gone now. We can't stand it. This guy has killed people. He's directly responsible. He's completely corrupt. We will burn this city down until he's gone. And so what happened 24 hours ago is the parliament got together and said, we vote him out. I don't even know if their constitution allows for that, but they did it. So President, now ex-President Yanukovych, Viktor Yanukovych, is no longer the president of Ukraine. He has flown somewhere to the east, surprise, surprise, where his peeps are. He's in one of his supporter strongholds somewhere in the east near the Russian border. It has been rumored he has tried to cross into Russia and been stopped. I think maybe that's just too good of a story to not make up. So whether he's trying to flee the country or not is unknown. I believe as of right this second, and this is Sunday, the 23rd, that he's still in the country. They have appointed a new president, an interim president and prime minister. They have now called for elections to be held, I guess, as soon as possible, so within the next few months. They have reverted to the old constitution. The parliament also overwhelmingly voted, wait for it, to release from jail Yulia Tymoshenko. This is like a soap opera, man. You couldn't make it up. And so that's where the country sits as of right now. February 23rd, Sunday night, the work week starts again tomorrow. In fact, it will start again here, given the time differential, in another few hours. So we'll see how Ukraine evolves out over the next week, because it's still pretty hot. And let me end on this. Sorry, this one went long. I thought it would be short. It never is short. Let me end on this note. This ain't over. There are still lots of people, the pro-Russian, I'll just call them pro-Russian for lack of a better, more descriptive term. The pro-Russian East, there are plenty of people in the pro-Russian East who are actually now out protesting saying our government's been taken over by fascists, that we democratically elected this guy, true, and this group of yahoos just threw rocks and threw him out of office. And that's one way to interpret it. So this is by a long shot over. I mean, this is still a divided country. Could it spiral into civil war? Kind of doubt it. But you still have a lot of unhappiness from both sides of the country and millions of people who are not going to be happy. Whatever happens next week, they're probably still not going to be happy. And the week after that, some of them are still not going to be happy. So we have a long way to go to see how the story is going to unfold. And of course, there's lots of impacts within the country, but also to the wider world. And that's where we'll stop now. And for the next podcast, pick up on what is the impact? where could Ukraine go? How is this going to play out for the EU? And most importantly, what is Mother Russia's role in all of this? And where will they go from here when it comes to Ukraine?